Welcome to the Dive Table. I'm Jay Gardner.
And I'm Sarah Miller. And today we're going to talk a little bit about rescues and emergencies. Why is this a topic that you're excited to talk about, Jay?
Well, unfortunately, emergencies happen. I don't know about you. I've been involved in a couple of those on the treatment side of it, not on the victim side of it. And they do happen. And we are in an environment that, if things go wrong, can punish you. And even if things go right, sometimes can punish you. And so being prepared at some level, I think is really important. And I always go back to just this idea of why when I first started diving, my goal was to get to rescue diver. And I think stress and rescue, there's different names for it in different agencies, but at the time in the agency I was a part of, it was rescue diver.
The gist of it is helping others, right?
Helping other people, yeah. And for me, I go back to, I set that goal because I had the opportunity to dive with a dive master in my first, 50 dives quite regularly. And I knew, and I felt like he could look me in the eye and say, I got you if something goes wrong. But I felt like I couldn't say the same back.
Yeah.
And so getting to that level is the ability for me as a teammate or as a buddy to be able to look at somebody and say, if things go wrong,
I got you.
I got you at some level, right? I got you at some level.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to say that.
Absolutely. All right. So let's get into it. So this topic came up because, I think I suggested it maybe because I just finished teaching a rescue course this past weekend. I was in Monterey and I was really excited about it because it's one of my favorite courses to teach. So I was a band nerd, right? But that's so this was back in high school and college. But that's very related to theater, right? Like I've played in the pit for shows and things like that. And I love the drama of rescue. Like I just love it. I love panicking and setting the scene and putting together all of the problems that could come.
You're an agent of chaos, is what you're saying.
I love it. Like, not in my day-to-day. I like living a really peaceful life, but when it comes to the rescue, I think the more chaos, the better, right? So that has been on my mind, obviously. And so we were discussing just ways that we get prepared for like diving and how to respond in emergencies. So that's why we're talking today. And I think it would be great to discuss sort of like the path of getting to the point of taking the rescue course, first of all, and then what you actually need to do to be effective in a rescue. So, Jay, what do you think of, like, when do you recommend that people proceed with getting the rescue or stress and, whatever you want to call it, the rescue certification?
That's a really good question. I think that to be successful in that course, and by success, I mean not getting certified, I mean actually taking the skills and retaining some of them for you, retaining the knowledge that you gain and all that. I think you need to feel comfortable in your own kit, in your own diving first. And it's not a number of dives necessarily. It's more of a comfort level that you have that, if you're not yet fully comfortable in executing a dive on your own or with your gear or with, your buoyancy or with, your finning techniques, that class is probably you'll miss a lot of it. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
So, my recommendation is, once you feel comfortable, you feel like, I'm in a place where I can control myself and control my gear and control a dive, then I think it's good to add that in, because then you can retain a lot of what gets taught. And it's not necessarily like it's really difficult, hard skills, but they will tax it will only make it harder, I guess, if your own skill set is not yet dialed in. It will make it much harder to retain anything. That would be my 2 cents.
Absolutely. I think another point is just having experience, like time in the water and seeing different problems, right? It doesn't have to be a full blown, like you need to witness an accident or whatever, but like deal with the normal things. Somebody falling in the surf, somebody losing a fin, accidentally, dropping a weight belt or whatever, these like very standard sort of things that we don't think of as accidents, right? But they're the precursors to
Mm-hmm.
something that could go much worse, right?
Yep.
It's what I always harp on my students is I want you to be such a good rescue diver that you don't actually have to rescue anyone because you're there and solving the problems before they escalate to that in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we want them to have the skills to be able to respond because sometimes you could do everything right and somebody has a heart attack. There's nothing you can do about that, right?
Right.
But so, like, get those skills to be able to do that. But the point is to stop, right? To recognize when people are stressed, to solve the problems, make decisions and judgment calls that will keep people from getting to that place of panic.
Yeah. Yeah. We kind of have a saying that it's, one major or three minors that
Yeah.
thumb the dive.
Yeah.
So a minor, like you said, could be, the weight belt or a compass malfunction that's happened, or, whatever it might be. They're minor things, a leak in your dry suit, or one major,
Yeah.
something like is a cramp a major or a minor? It depends on the person and whether it's resolved or
Right.
not, right? Or getting lost or those sorts of things. So I think you're right that there's a way that you can catch it before it spins out of control. There's never really something that happens in the water that should be a surprise that becomes a major. Usually
Mm-hmm.
they're escalating towards something.
Right.
I remember a particular dive that this became true. I just got back from drift diving in Mexico, which is tons of fun, by the way. I mean, drift diving is just a lovely way to dive because you
Oh,
just
yeah.
get in and down you go and go where you want, basically. And when you're all done, shoot an SMB and someone's there to pick you up. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful diving, but you're dealing with a lot of current, whether it be light or it be strong current, you're in current. And I remember I just gotten back and we were doing a lake dive back in Texas. And, it was one of those dives where things just kind of went wonky to the point where I had a digital compass at the time and it didn't matter which direction I looked, it was north. So clearly that was malfunctioning. We lost kind of visibility in mid water. It was that soupy brown water,
Mm-hmm.
so you couldn't see the bottom. You had no idea really where you were except for depth. And I remember for myself, those were two, right? 1, 2. And then the third one was all of a sudden, I don't know why, but all of a sudden I felt like I was back in a current. I was drift diving again. And my
Mm-hmm.
body just thought, oh, you're in the drift again. So I started to kick, across the current like you're supposed to. And it took me a little while, I don't know, 30 seconds, a minute, however long it was, to realize, dude, you're in a lake. There's no such thing as a current. What are you doing? By that time, I turned around and I could barely see the lights of my team, and was dizzy, all that, and got vertigo.
Yeah.
And so I went back to the team, thumbed the dive. We came up, and another guy had gotten vertigo somehow in that dive. And we're like, forget this. We're 20 minutes in the dive. We're thumbing the dive. Let's go back to the surface and we'll try again the next one. And that's what we did. And although we probably could have continued, although things might have been okay, you see that escalation to where if we just push through that, what could happen next?
Yeah.
And that's a good place to stop. So that's the kind of one major or three minors, thumb the dive.
Yeah, I've heard that I think that that's probably a UTD and a GUE thing because I've heard that in different circles in diving, and I think it's a good one. But going back to like going after the certification, I think just having a few more dives under your belt, however many that is. I've shared before that I did the 0 to hero thing. Don't recommend it. I did my rescue course. And although, according to how I felt in the water, like what you were talking about, like, do you feel comfortable? Can you solve your own problems? Whatever. I met that, right? But I had no experience with like seeing anything go wrong. I was diving in Koh Tao, which is a warm bathtub, like I had no context for things that could go wrong. Right. So I didn't get as much out of my rescue. And I think that's really important. I was talking to my student about it, and she had joined me on my Baja dive expedition, and we had discussed the rescue during that trip. She was like, "Do you think I'm ready for it and everything?" And I was like, "Listen, I've seen you dive. Like, you're solid, and you're diving regularly. So, and you're shore diving from Monterey. So, yes, I think it's about that time to make that step." And like, she killed it. Like, she did such a good job. I mean, I don't know if you've been diving in Monterey, but it's not easy. We had one day where it was like downpour, like horrible, horrible rain, bad visibility. She was dragging. I had an instructor assist us, and he's 200 pounds of just like muscle, and had her, dragging him, carrying him up the beach and everything. Like, it's a tough course. And so you have to, when you're thinking about signing up for it, do you have the experience, and are you taking care of yourself? Right? We've harped on nutrition and health and everything. Like, you need to be in decent shape to be able to do, especially if you're doing it from the shore and dealing with shore exits.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, I would echo as well. I think that when it comes to basic life support or basic first aid, those things, the clock on that is every 2 years for your
Mhm.
CPR and those things, and you have to take a refresher every 2 years. And I also don't think it's a bad idea to put some sort of clock and take this course multiple times. Take it every couple years, 3 years, whatever it might be, to keep those skills engaged. It's not just about earning the certification; it's actually about keeping those skills engaged and fresh. And that's a really good point that you bring up, that keeping yourself physically fit is really important, as well as keeping yourself mentally fit, which may
Mhm.
mean taking a refresher or auditing the course. Can I come along and be a part and be the victim or whatever it would be
Yeah.
to keep those skills fresh?
And that's what I was going to say, because speaking from the camp of like, maybe we can't afford to do, rescue training all the time. You can put together a dive group where, once a month or once every other month, you guys get together and you practice some of those rescue skills. Or like you said, keep in touch with your instructor if you're like locally diving, right? And ask them, like, please contact me if you're doing a rescue, because I want to assist. And that way
Hmm.
you get that practice with it.
So what do
So
you think?
yeah.
So staying on the course a little bit,
Yeah.
you just taught this, so this is
Hmm.
this is an interesting one. What do you think, if you had to choose? We're just going to be in that world, the universe that you have to. What is the one takeaway that you hope the student gets from either a skill perspective or a knowledge perspective about stress and rescue?
Mm.
Ooh, put you on the spot.
Yeah. I think the main point, and this is actually taught in the EFR, so you don't even need to be a diver to kind of encounter this, but it's that, um, oh gosh, adequate care provided is better than perfect care withheld, right?
Mm,
So it's having the confidence to do something, right? Instead of getting it into your brain. Like, that's why the style that I teach for rescue is very much like, let's practice and make sure that we understand things, but also give ourselves grace that, like, in a real accident, you're not going to be perfect.
yeah.
Who's going to be perfect? I'm not. Even though I've
Hmm.
done this a million times, there's going to be something, because it is a stressful environment, and you're going to do the best that you can, right? And it comes back to those good Samaritan laws of acting in good faith, right? So you're not being negligent, and within your training.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think that's the biggest thing. Like, yes, there are tons of skills that I want to make sure they are comfortable with and that they execute correctly. But the main thing is that, like, not being afraid.
Mm. That's I love that you picked that one. I had a different one, but now I want to
Let's
change
hear
it to
it.
yours because,
No,
well,
let's hear it.
I want to build on what you said though first
Okay. Okay.
because I think that's so important, and I think you're absolutely right. Because for me personally, that was a holdup. I remember
Yeah.
as a kid, I wanted to be a
Mm-hmm.
astronaut medic, right? Like all kids, but I really wanted to be a medic and was pursuing that. And with my own wounds, I was fine. You know, like stick your finger in it, throw some dirt on it, no big deal. But as soon as it came to somebody else, I was so afraid of making it worse.
Yeah.
That what I did, that I'm going to hurt them. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember very clearly in my mind, my aunt had surgery, minor surgery, but she was in the hospital recovering, and I went to visit her. And I remember being so afraid to even put a blanket over her or something, you know, thinking I'm going to hurt her. I don't know what to do. And that was a big barrier for me to get over in all of my first aid training. And I went through Dan. I'm a Dan instructor now, all of that, but I had to get through all of that fear of doing the wrong thing and the realization that that person that you're going to treat is in the worst state they possibly can be in when you have to intervene. And so you taking action is only going to improve the state that they're in, even
Right.
if you make mistakes, even if you don't know 100%, you know, that you did the right thing, that intervention is going to have value. And so I love that you picked that one. Was not in my brain to pick that, but I think that's
Well,
critically
what
important.
was yours? What was yours? I want to hear.
Mine was really around awareness.
Yeah.
And I think under the water,
Situational awareness, huh?
yes. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, just being able to
Absolutely.
see when somebody's not right, whether that
Mm-hmm.
be under the water or on the boat afterwards or before the dive, even just to see that something's not going right.
Yeah.
Usually, if someone's, you know, stressed out and moving around erratically a little bit, it could just be they're stressed out, and you getting in front of them and putting your mask in front of their mask and giving some eye contact and saying, hey, everything's okay, and helping them solve whatever they're trying to solve, or just giving some reassurance, can prevent a lot of the escalation that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But seeing, observing, having awareness for your buddy or your teammates, I think is something that, for me, the stress and rescue course is so incredibly important. You
Mm-hmm.
know, even if you don't know what to do, they're having a cramp, and you know you're not quite sure how to resolve that for them. The fact that you recognize that someone else is having the cramp, for the person having the cramp, it's super reassuring. It's
Yeah.
going to help calm them down. It's going to hopefully prevent the escalation to a point where it does become an emergency.
Yeah.
So that's what I kind of harp on in my courses is really, and put divers in a position to have situational awareness that might not be so, you know, obtuse, or it might not be so out there, but the littler things. Did you notice this? No, I missed it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
what, now it's going to lead to this. Oh, you
Yeah.
didn't notice that. Now it's going to lead to this, and keep
Mm-hmm.
escalating until that point of situational awareness is driven home.
Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the big keys.
Absolutely. No, I love that. That's samesies, right? There's a lot of takeaways from this training. Like, it's part of the reason why I really push people who are regularly diving to get to that level, because there's such a dramatic shift in people's perception of the sport and their understanding of what's going on around them. I think it's wildly um, valuable, right? So let's maybe go into like equipment and things that you think are well, that we all know are necessary, right? But maybe
Yeah.
we could talk about stuff that you'll find when you go with dive operators, and then maybe stuff that the two of us carry because we dive individually, right? um and uh and we dive out of our cars. We talked about this a bit in the previous episode, but we can kind of stick to rescue stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the obvious answer here on a dive boat or at a dive site, or if you're diving with your buddies or your teammates, is an O2 bottle, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a real medical grade O2 bottle that has the different masks and the this that and the other thing. Although that's great, I think that's the optimal version.
Yeah.
You can also grab a 40 cubic foot of O2 with a regulator on it, but
Hmm.
having access to oxygen, because oxygen is the treatment for both decompression sickness and decompression illness. And if something like that happens, the first step in the intervention is really oxygen, create a pressure differential, the PPO2, right? So I always have that with me in the truck. And I might be a weirdo, and people sometimes look at me weird, but it's one of those things when I get to the dive site and I say, hey, so whoever I'm diving with, the O2 is behind the passenger seat in my truck and my keys are here. So if
Yeah.
something goes
I
wrong
don't
for
think,
me,
yeah. I don't think that that's, I mean, you said like people might think you're a weirdo. I think that that needs to be like common practice for all of us. Like I know for myself, for a long time, I did not have oxygen in my van. And that was very risky. I don't recommend that to people because I was out diving by myself. I mean, granted, if something happened where like I was unconscious or whatever, like I was going to be dead. And that same
yeah,
thing, like for all of us, because I know that there are other people that solo dive, like there's that risk, right? Because we don't have somebody that can drag us out of whatever. Um, Granted, we should have other things in place so that eventually people do realize that something went wrong, right? But I think O2, like you're right on. I just recently got my O2, and I got one of those cases from Dan, so it has like all of uh, the different masks and everything. And yeah, I think that needs to shift. That a lot of us, everybody, if they can, like should have O2 on site because it does make a difference in the rescue.
yeah. And if sometimes that can be difficult to get filled, and can be a
Have you
pain here
had
and there.
have you had trouble with it though?
I did in Texas, surprisingly.
Okay, because here in California, man, it's a breeze.
Yeah,
Like I couldn't believe how easy it was. What
that
was the
was a little
issue in
tough.
Texas?
Well, it's a matter of usage, and they yeah, you can show your O2 provider card.
Hmm.
Um, I even I took my instructor card to say no, I'm an instructor in this. Um, in O2,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they finally went okay. I think it depends on where you go, but I ended up at a fire station, and that
Okay.
was the best place to make it happen. So there are commercial, obviously, people are on medical oxygen, just non-diving, right, for different reasons. If you go into one of those places, I found it to be hard because they wanted a
Yeah.
prescription.
Well, yeah,
That was the
because
big deal.
it's medical grade, right? There's a difference between medical and aviation.
Hmm.
So like um that's where I've heard of the distinction. Um could you not have gone to just a dive shop that had O2 for nitrox?
Um, Again, in a situation I was in, there wasn't a lot of that available within the dive shops. There's one
That makes
place that really
sense.
did
Yeah. It's
more than
Texas. You
just air.
guys, well, and especially where you were, it's not like you were on the coast. So
Yeah,
like it makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
What I've found, because I was concerned, I was reading about all of that and was like, oh gosh, am I going to need a freaking prescription for this? And like, granted, actually, Dan put out in their like most recent newsletter or whatever, uh, it's like the exception, right? That scuba diving is one of those exceptions. And you can show that I think they link PDF that lists all of the regulations that why it's an exception, and you can take that to places and like hopefully get it filled without a prescription. But what I've understood is that when you go to like dive shops and everything, they're using aviation grade oxygen, right?
Right.
So that's a little bit different. It's still totally breathable, totally safe, but maybe instead of 99.99999% oxygen, it's like 9.8 or something. Like it's not quite the same grade. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But there is, you know, a variation, right? There's a difference between the two. And I literally went to the dive shop and they just hooked up the tanks and filled them. I paid, ready to go. Like super easy.
Yeah. And I think that's an important piece to say. You do need to go through the training. It's not just show up at the dive shop and say,
Right.
give me O2. You know, you need to go through the training to understand oxygen is, well, actually, yeah, it's let's call it a more dangerous gas than air. We'll put it that
Hmm.
way. In its handling, and you need to
Yeah.
understand that. But it's the number one treatment. And I think it's important too, even if you're not necessarily ready to go grab your own bottle of O2 and your own treatment, to ask the question or to pay attention to the dive briefing when you're with your instructor, or if you're on the dive boat. Almost every dive boat is going to say our O2 and our AED,
Yeah.
the defibrillator, are located aft in this compartment or
Yeah.
located above this. Mark that in your head, right?
Yeah.
Keep that in your mind. Although you may not be the highest level trained, which is kind of how the cascade goes in terms of medical treatment, is, you know, the person that has the highest level of training becomes once they assume control, they are in control.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine it goes from, you know, Joe Schmo to instructor to medic to nurse to doctor, right? In
Mhm.
those ways. Even though you might not be the one to be providing that treatment, you may be asked to go grab it, or
Yeah.
to, you know, that's the first thing that you're going to do as an instructor, is say, hey, Sarah, go grab the O2. Hey, John, you know, notify the captain. Hey, so-and-so, grab a blanket or a pill, whatever it might be. Just because you are not trained doesn't mean that you won't be involved in that intervention, at the direction of the person that is the primary care person in that moment. So it's just good to
Absolutely.
keep a note of those things and to be ready to help. And again, to get over that fear, like you talked about earlier, Sarah, about, you know, doing something is better than doing nothing.
Yeah.
And so doing something.
Yeah. What else? So other things that I think of when I think of emergencies, like what tools do I have available? So when we're boat diving, also boats are going to have first aid kits, right? If we're shore diving, hopefully we do too. Yeah, like all of the normal stuff that you would need for cuts, dislocations. What
Yeah,
else?
sling,
Yeah, yeah.
cuts, marine bites.
Splints, bites. Yes. Oh my gosh. Um, so kind of the basics in a first aid kit is really helpful. And then like things that float, right? So like our dive floats and flags, like these are all safety pieces, right?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I just added when I got back from this trip
Mm-hmm.
to from Florida to my first aid kit was new skin.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
you know, it's one of those little hacks that I got some cuts. I got in a fight with a big dive knife trying to cut some bungee on the surface. I
Oh
got a
no.
little cut. I mean, a little
Oh
nick.
no.
It was bleeding, whatever. And access to waterproof bandages, you know, they
Mm,
just fall off when you're in the water, isn't there?
yeah.
And if you're diving multiple days, wounds being in the water just
Oh,
don't
the
heal.
worst.
They
Oh my
take
gosh.
forever. So new skin or super glue, even
Mm-hmm.
to seal that sucker up and to give it some time to heal, is really nice. Like I literally have a cut on my hand right now that is still, you know, it's 2 weeks old for a little itty bitty little cut that bled a little bit. It's going to turn into a nasty scar because I was under
Yeah.
the water for 2 hours a day.
Right.
So new skin, those sorts of things, access to fresh water, having
Mm-hmm.
a big, you know, gallon of fresh water as part of your first aid kit, to rinse wounds, and to deal with some of those things, I think is good. And then some of the other things that I put in my little first aid kit as well, Dramamine.
Mm-hmm.
I know
Yeah.
that sounds silly, but you
No,
know,
it's
if you
not.
take it too late, it's not going to help. But
Yeah.
you know, if you can jump in and do it, great. And I also keep a couple packets of that quick hydration
Mm-hmm.
stuff in my first aid kit. So
Yeah.
liquid IV or drip drop or those I have two of those in there that sometimes, the diving incident is dehydration
Yeah.
and you need a way to hydrate quickly. You could put your salt and a lime in your in your in your first aid
I
kit.
had I had several people reach out and ask about that. Like it was a new thing for people, I guess, the salt and lime water trick. I also, in my first aid kit, I have cold packs and hot packs. So the ones that the hot ones are the ones that you can like reuse, right? So you crack them and they get nice and warm and they'll stay warm for, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes. And then you can boil them and use them again. They're quite neat.
Ooh, I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Is
They're
that a
very
special
cool.
kind or is it
I don't know the
all of
brand.
them?
I don't know the brand, but maybe I can look that up and we can have a link in
Yeah,
the
we should post
show
like a link of
description.
all the stuff that we
Yeah.
over the years have collected into our
Yeah.
first aid kit.
Yeah, I think those really helped me back when I was still diving a wetsuit in cold California water. That was like
Yeah.
lifesaver.
Yeah.
Um Other than first aid things, something that like we played with this past weekend was a pocket mask. So
Mm-hmm.
that's helpful for giving rescue breaths in the water. And then other like rescue type equipment or just like safety in general would be like SMB, right? A cutting tool. We already talked about a knife. Um, Having those things will support us when we have certain types of accidents. Think about that drift dive, right? I was laughing earlier because I'm like so excited. I'm going to Komodo very, very soon. I'm taking a group to dive there the beginning of June. So it's like just under a month away.
Ooh.
And yeah. And the
Do
currents
you
there
still
can
have
get
spots,
wild. I do
by
have
the way?
spots. Yes, I
Okay,
do.
so if
Yeah.
you're looking to go dive, sign
Yeah.
up with
Last
Sarah. Where
minute
can they
spots.
go?
They can go to my website, azulunlimited.com. Yeah. I still have
Okay.
a couple of spots. It's a great group that I have put together. And, but I was thinking about some of the funny dives that I've had in Komodo where you go and you have that same thing that you were talking about, right? You go down, you drift along with the current, and then you pop up. And sometimes you pop up and there's no one there.
Nobody there.
Right? And you're like, oh crap. Right. So having a big SMB is really helpful, especially if there's like big waves. You'll be more visible if it's large, right? And also, I'm looking into getting some kind of device that can send a signal. So
Mm.
I've looked at some of the ones that like are very typical to diving. I've actually been looking at the Garmin InReach, which is a lot
Mm-hmm.
more expensive and it has a monthly subscription, which I don't love because I don't like paying monthly subscriptions for things. Um, but I like that is something that I could take to backcountry hikes and, use it in multiple, when I'm stand up paddleboarding. Like I don't have to be out on the water with boats. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So those are the types of things that I think about when it comes to safety. And then obviously, oh my gosh, we haven't even talked about this yet. But insurance. Like
Yes. Oh boy.
insurance. Oh my God. Have insurance. I have Dan insurance. I think you mentioned that you're a Dan instructor. So I'm assuming you also have Dan, but
I do.
that's hugely important because hyperbaric chamber treatments are not cheap.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and that it's interesting. There's a lot of what's the word, buzz right now around dive
Yes.
insurance, and for certain reasons. But look, the bottom line is you need to protect yourself, and that's one way. Whether you choose Dan or you choose other, I think there's a few other options as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's important because you don't want to get stuck having a really bad day
Mm-hmm.
on diving and then that turned into having a really bad few years of paying it off and
Yeah.
dealing financially with that. So the insurance protects you from that, but the encouragement, like all insurance, is really understand
Understand
what
it.
you're signing
Yes.
and what it can do for you and what it can't.
And be aware when you're making those decisions to go diving. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm making this decision to dive here in these conditions in this place or whatever, and I know that I am not covered, right? Like understanding that and deciding if that's a decision that you want to if that's what you want to go for.
Yep. And that's tough sometimes. And I mean, what I will say about Dan is that they are accessible. So if you're
Yeah.
reading through your policy and you have questions, you can call and ask. And
Yeah.
if you don't get a satisfactory answer, call and ask somebody else, so on and so forth. And I mean, you want to get down to really understanding the limitations of your coverage
Hmm.
versus, and make informed decisions about the risk you're willing to take versus what you're not, so on and so forth.
Hmm. Yeah. Any other like safety equipment that you recommend people have? Oh, like a mirror, maybe a whistle, right?
Yeah,
Like
some
all the
sound.
surface marker um, pieces.
Yeah, there's a nice little hack too for if you're diving with an SMB in windy conditions that I like is, fishing lures have spinners, and
Mm,
you can actually rig your SMB up so that it will spin, which is quite nice because when the wind's blowing really hard, it can knock your SMB down. And
hmm.
it's a really easy little rigging to put a little spinner on it so that the wind just spins it rather than knocks it down. If you're in, larger waves, or if you're dealing with a lot of wind and you're worried about the boat actually seeing you. So
Okay.
that's a nice little hack,
I'll
easy
have
one to
to
do.
I'll have to see what you have set up. I haven't seen that before. That sounds cool.
Yeah, I'll take a picture. It's really easy. Right on the SMB,
Say
you put a spinner,
take a picture, post it in the Facebook
put it
group.
on Facebook. Good point. Yeah.
There we go.
Um, the only other piece I would say we haven't covered, and it may be equipment or it may not be in your book, but in my book it is having a plan, understanding where the
Absolutely.
local hospital is, where's the
Emergency
closest
action
hyperbaric
plan.
chamber. Yep.
Yeah.
Where is, what are the numbers to call?
Hmm.
Don't just assume it's 911.
If you're in the United
Those sorts of
States.
things. If you're in the US, sorry, if you're in
Yeah.
the US, exactly. Having at least, and it doesn't need to be, it's nice if you can write it all down because in that moment you grab it and you don't have to think, but at least to have a discussion with a local about, hey, where is the local chamber and what is the number to call? I mean, we were
Yeah.
diving, a month ago or so together, and I just said, hey,
Yeah.
where's the local one?
Yeah, we went diving with Mitch, right?
Yeah,
We
where's
told that
Mitch?
story. Yeah, where's Mitch? We told that story, and that's he was showing us around Laguna, and that's exactly what you did. And I thought that was really really smart of you.
Yeah, it's just have a little bit of that knowledge. Whether you build a formal emergency action plan, EAP as it's known, or you just have it in your mind. The other thing, little hacks too, is to have your insurer's number in your phone, right? So
Hmm.
Dan, is in my phone as a speed dial if needed. Um, for me, my local diving, I have the local hyperbaric chamber number in my phone. And that way I don't have to, it just lessens the load in that stressful moment of what you need to think about. And so, although those are not pieces of equipment, they are things that you can have to, I think, increase the safety and to have a better emergency response for sure.
Yeah, I like it. There's also like pieces of equipment, kind of pieces. I'm gonna just talk about a piece of equipment that you can make. That's almost like it's actually exactly like a dog tag, right? That can have all of your information, and it's just like on your BCD. So you could have, if you're allergic to certain medications or, whatever, like the necessary medical information, you can have that on your equipment so that if people were like taking you out because you're unconscious underwater, the help team will know how to move forward with treatment.
Yeah, you can put that in a pocket, or if you're wearing a dry suit, you can have it around your neck or something like that as well. I think that's a good idea. And
Yeah.
and on that note, this is maybe a public service announcement that I've been on a kick for lately. But when it comes to emergencies for yourself, there's also some preventative things that you can think about. So, for example, one of the big ones is a PFO,
Mm.
and that is really something that can cause a lot of problem under the water that you just don't have any signs or symptoms for.
Do you want
And
to
so,
say what that is? Do you want to tell them
yeah,
what that is?
a PFO essentially is a hole between the left and right
Mm-hmm.
archia, the upper chambers of the heart. It's I'm going to screw up the the pronunciation, but
Oh, I
patent
would do worse.
foramen ovale, I think, PTO. And
PFO. Yeah.
it's I'm sorry, PFO, yeah, PTO is paid time off.
Yeah.
Um, PFO, and it really happens at birth. It's something that didn't close up when you were, in your mom's belly, and it, you can live your whole life with it and never know it exists and never have a problem
Yeah.
until you're a diver,
Yeah.
and then it can cause problems. So the treatment for that is painless. I've been through it, or not treatment, but the test for that is painless. And the treatment actually is a very minor surgery from what I understand. I haven't done it because I didn't have a PFO, but there's a little bit of, explaining this to your doctor and getting the right way to do it, to get it approved by your insurance company. But I went and got that screening because I wanted to know,
What
and
was involved?
so it's a bubble test where essentially they're injecting, what do they call it? Agitated saline. I think they just shake up some salt water and make some bubbles, and then they inject it. So they have to put an IV in,
Yeah.
but then they inject that, and then
And
they
track.
essentially watch your heart and can
Mm,
track the bubbles through the chambers of your heart to
very
confirm
cool.
whether. So it's kind of a, it's lay there for an hour, and yeah, it feels cold and you have to take an IV, but it's pretty much painless and thoughtless to do. I really recommend, if you're a diver on a regular basis, try to get that test approved from your
Yeah.
insurance and your doctor.
I think that's
The other
really smart. Before you move on, because they're finding, or at least last I looked into this, is they're finding that a lot more accidents that were kind of lumped into one category actually could have been because of PFO. So they're thinking that it's much more common than we originally assumed.
Yeah, yeah, and for me personally, I just wanted to know,
Yeah.
and if I had it, then I wanted to get it fixed, because for me, I want to dive as long as I possibly can, as many
Hmm.
dives as I possibly can, and this was something that was hidden beneath the surface. I just didn't know, and it took some time to work through why with my doctor. Which is my other point to this: is
Yeah.
if you can find a doctor that understands diving. It may
Hmm.
not be a hyperbaric doc, but there are some doctors that specialize or understand scuba diving and the effects that has on your body.
Hmm.
Try to do that, to talk about these diving things, because I've heard too many stories of doctors that don't really understand diving, and then you
Yeah.
give them a sheet that says, "Hey, you need to sign this off to make sure that I can go take this course," and they don't know. They just ask you, "Well, do you have this?" I don't know. Oh, okay, fine, and they sign it off. That's not good medical care in my view.
No.
So people that are informed, it's tough to find. I've still struggled to find exactly that doctor, but if you can, that's worth the time.
I would say that it's probably very, very challenging. Like I'm on the California standard health insurance, right? And I would venture to guess that I even if I wanted to, I couldn't find a doctor that was that had knowledge in that field. So, do the best that you can. I think I might have mentioned this in one of our podcasts, but we always joked, back when I was on Koh doing my dive master, there was a doctor around the corner from the dive shop, and he would sign anything. And so we just called him Dr. Death, because
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, you could literally just like, yeah, sure. Like I have all these medical conditions, but I want to go diving. So just sign this. And he'd be like, okay, no big deal. So yeah, I think it's really cool that if you have found somebody like that, or if you can find somebody, but it may not be, at least in this country where you are, where you live, it may not be possible because it's still such a niche sport.
So one resource you can look at, which people may not be aware of, but just check it out, is the Undersea and Hyperbaric Medical Society,
Yeah.
UHMS. And these are doctors that are thinking about diving in hyperbaric medicine or undersea medicine. And they're a good place to start. There's a lot of them that are listed. Maybe there's one near you, and you can connect at least and say, "Hey, how can this, what do I need to know?" So on and so forth. It's really a nonprofit organization, And it's a source of scientific information for diving and hyperbaric medicine worldwide.
Yeah,
So
great
that's a place to
resource.
start,
Yeah.
and would highly recommend checking that out. And in fact, I have had the honor. They do a yearly conference, and part of that conference is here in San Diego. And I've had the honor of teaching a buoyancy lab to all these docs, and it was really cool to get to
Adorable.
know some of them. And and some of them are good divers, some of them not so good divers, and
Yeah.
they're still learning the diving. And so it's super fascinating to talk to them. Why did they get into hyperbaric medicine? Some of them aren't even divers, which is
Yeah.
fascinating to get in that side. So really,
Well,
really good
because
resource for you to look at.
yeah, because hyperbaric chambers are used for a multitude of treatments, right? It's not just scuba diving. If that were the case, the business model would have crashed a long time ago,
A long
right?
time ago, yeah.
Yeah. So so that makes sense that not all of them are divers or familiar with it. But that's really cool. That's awesome. You got to experience that. Um so I don't know. I feel like there was some decent nuggets in here. Do you have final words? Anything else you want to share with people about rescues? Stay up to date. Get together and
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the final point for me is, some of this stuff. I mean, an O2 kit is expensive.
Yeah.
Um, Filling your first aid kit can be expensive.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Getting a test for a PFO, depending on your insurance, can be expensive. I mean, some of these things are can be looked at as sunk costs, in the sense that you're never going to touch it, so I don't need it anyways, or I've never had to touch that before, so why would I need it now? And I totally understand that line of thinking. And the hope is you never need it. That's really the hope. And it does sit there and collect dust, and obviously you need to keep it up to date and so on and so forth, but you
Yeah,
don't need
check
it.
it, test it.
But the consequence of not having it when you
Mhm.
do need it is high. And I'll tell my quick story of this, and that is, I came up from a dive with a teammate of mine, and in this particular dive site, we all had picnic benches where we got ready, and then we went down to the water, and we came up to our picnic bench, and someone who I didn't know, wasn't diving with us, was sitting on our picnic bench with this kit on, not looking so good. And both me and my buddy, who also happened to be an instructor, recognized, hey, something might be off here. And so we started to talk to him, and clearly there was something wrong. Got his kit off, and eventually he ended up on the ground, and we snapped into, it's time to help. And so I ran and grabbed the O2 kit. We administered O2 immediately. He was having, tremors and in and out of consciousness, all these sorts of things. And at that moment, it doesn't really matter why. It matters the signs and symptoms you're seeing, and to treat those. And we activated the network. Hey, you call 911. Hey, you go stand by the gate and make sure that the EMTs know where to go, so on and
Mhm.
so forth. And this escalated over the course of, we treated him for, I think it was 27 minutes it took
Wow.
for the EMTs to get there. They took a
Jeez.
wrong turn, and
Ugh.
eventually he was medevaced, or flown out on a helicopter from that dive site, to a hyperbaric chamber.
Wow.
And I have to say, it wasn't one of those things that I was thinking about coming up from that dive.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm ready to treat somebody. But I was so thankful that those skills kicked in. And, the story kind of concludes later that, I think he took 4 or 5 rides in the chamber.
Mm.
Doesn't matter the reason. I'm not going to go into that today. But he was so thankful to me and to my buddy
Yeah.
for being there and recognizing it. And you never know. Who knows if it could have been worse had we not been there, or the same outcome would have happened. Who knows? But he ended up surviving.
That's
And
awesome.
in my mind, I think, hey, that's all worth it. So
Yeah.
again, all of this is worth it. You hope you never need these skills. You hope you never
Mhm.
need the kit. You hope that nothing's ever going to go wrong. And that could very well be the case for the next 40 years of your diving. But the consequence of not having the training, the consequence of not having O2 or first aid available, those consequences are high, whether for yourself or for somebody else that you don't even know.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe the big point to drive home, is that um, it's better to be prepared and to be ready and hope it never happens than for it to happen and have no preparedness and no idea what to do.
Yeah. And another point, just to finish this out, based on your story and something that we haven't quite mentioned, is the understanding that us as rescue divers or emergency first responders, the point, like, we're not gonna necessarily save somebody, right? But we keep them alive to a point that the real help can come, right? Like, that's what the training is for. It's to support that person in the accident until somebody who's properly trained, medically trained, to like really intervene, right? And to get them to the places that are actually going to help them. Like, I think there might be a misconception of people thinking that they're going to be like resuscitating people magically after they've had a heart attack. And it's like, no, it's probably not going to go that way, even if you have an AED, you know? So I think that's another thing, like an expectation piece for moving forward with that training and acting in accidents.
Yeah, and to build on that, maybe to as we put a bow on this one too, is, I think there's also a temptation to go the other way with that. Once you have that training, and to maybe behave more like a white knight and try to save everybody. And I remember I went through that at one point. Someone's, had some bubbles coming from their tank, and I'm thinking, oh, that's not a safe way to dive, and I can just fix that real quick and grab the tank and fix the reg that's on it. Well, that freaked that diver out, because I'm touching his equipment, and that's not a good way. So you have to put this all in balance, like you said, that these skills are there to help sustain their basic first aid or first responder first aid until someone can take over. That, like in my case, was 27 minutes, but can be 5 minutes, can be an hour. It was a long time.
Yeah.
And actually, what's interesting is that led to a lot of discussion about why did it take that long,
right,
and how do we improve all around that dive site. But also, just because you're trained does not mean that you put the doctor before your name now and need to go around saving everybody. I think it's about that awareness, seeing the signs, hearing about the symptoms, observing what's happening, and being able to react in an appropriate way. And like we've said before, usually that is before something becomes an emergency.
Yeah.
That awareness helps us. So
cool.
really good episode.
Nice. Well, I don't know. I would love to hear stories from people if they've experienced accidents or almost, if they have some good stories that we could learn from in the Facebook community. That would be really cool. I'll try to get in there and share some of mine from Komodo. And find us there. You can also look us up on our website. You can email us. We're just happy to have these conversations and keep people safe out there.
Absolutely. And if you are thinking about training in any of these things, or you're thinking about, should I do it? Should I not? Am I ready? Reach out to Sarah and I. We'll have an honest conversation. And
absolutely.
And we're not trying to sell you our training, but we'll have an honest conversation about, when it is appropriate, or when should you refresh those skills and things. So, when you are safer, all of us become safer on that dive boat, or in that dive location, or in your dive team. So I think it's something near and dear to our hearts, and something that you don't need to be on the path to be an instructor or anything like that to be engaged in helping other people. So reach out and let us know. And I owe a post on my first aid kit and what I take with me to a dive site. And I'm curious to see what other hacks people have so that I can improve my own first aid kit. So I'll post that up on the Facebook list or Facebook group when it comes out, and we can have a collaborative group think on cool things to include in your first aid kit.
I have a pretty good one because I just got a bunch of gear from Dan, so I'll share mine as well. It's got everything. I was really impressed with it, actually. So cool. I think that's about it. Thanks for listening to us today. We appreciate you.
And we'll see you on the next episode of The Dive Table.
Bye.
The Dive Table is a production of Fish Dive Surf Incorporated and a member of the Fish Dive Surf Podcast Network. You can find out more at www.fishdivesurf.com.